He thought she was nobody, just a clumsy waitress in a cheap uniform, invisible to a man who ruled the city with an iron fist. But in the underworld, nothing is ever what it seems. One spilled drink, one moment of cruel arrogance, and one single sentence whispered in perfect Sicilian that stopped a heartless killer cold. James Ritchie, the Don of New York, was about to learn the most expensive lesson of his life. Never humiliate a woman whose secrets are darker than your own. This isn't just a romance, it's a reckoning. Watch until the end, because the twist will leave you breathless. The atmosphere inside L'Obsidienne was always suffocating, despite the air conditioning being set to a crisp 68 degrees. It was the kind of place where the lighting was dim enough to hide sins, but bright enough to catch the sparkle of diamonds on the wrists of women who knew better than to ask where the money came from. Isabella smoothed the front of her black apron, her fingers trembling slightly. She hated Tuesday nights. Tuesdays meant the inner circle was here. In the VIP section, elevated slightly above the rest of the floor like a throne room, sat James Ritchie. At 32, James wasn't just a mob boss. He was an institution. He had the kind of face that stopped traffic. Sharp jawline, eyes the color of burnt espresso, and a mouth that rarely smiled unless he was watching someone bleed. He was wearing a bespoke charcoal suit that cost more than Isabella made in a year. "Table 4 needs a refill on the primitive," her manager, a sweaty man named Carl, hissed in her ear. "And for God's sake, Bella, don't make eye contact. You know how Ritchie is when he's discussing business." "I know," Isabella said, her voice barely a whisper. She kept her head down, grabbing the bottle of 1995 Chateau Margaux. She walked towards the VIP section, her steps silent on the plush carpet. James was surrounded by 3 men, his consigliere, Silvio, and 2 captains from the Bronx. The tension at the table was thick enough to choke on. "Disrespect is a disease, Silvio," James was saying, his voice a low, smooth baritone that vibrated through the room. "And I don't cure diseases, I cut them out." Isabella approached the table. She knew the drill. Pour the wine. Be invisible. Disappear. She reached over Silvio's shoulder to refill James's glass. Just as the crimson liquid began to flow, one of the Bronx captains slammed his fist on the table in a sudden fit of rage over the negotiation. "That's not the deal we agreed on, Dom." The sudden jolt knocked Isabella's elbow. Time seemed to slow down. The bottle slipped. The red wine didn't just spill. It launched itself like a wave across the table, splashing directly onto the front of James Ritchie's pristine white dress shirt. The silence that followed was louder than a gunshot. The entire restaurant seemed to freeze. Forks stopped halfway to mouths. The piano player in the corner faltered. James slowly looked down at his chest, watching the red stain spread like a fresh gunshot wound. Then he slowly lifted his eyes to Isabella. She wasn't trembling anymore. She was frozen. I am so sorry, sir," she stammered, grabbing a napkin instinctively. "I can fix—" James caught her wrist. His grip was like a steel trap. He didn't squeeze hard enough to break bone, but enough to let her know she was property. "You can fix it?" James repeated, his voice dangerously calm. He stood up, towering over her. He was well over 6 feet, a wall of muscle and expensive cologne. "You think you can fix a $5,000 suit with a paper napkin?" "It was an accident," Isabella said, her eyes meeting his. "That was her first mistake. You didn't look the devil in the eye." James sneered, looking at her with pure, unadulterated disgust. "Look at you. Pathetic. Do you know how much this wine costs? More than your life is worth." He released her wrist with a shove that sent her stumbling back. She caught her balance against a chair, but the humiliation was already burning her cheeks. "Clean it up," James barked. He gestured to the floor where wine had dripped onto his Italian leather shoes. "On your knees." The restaurant watched. No one moved to help. Carl, the manager, was hiding in the kitchen. Isabella stared at him. A spark of something dangerous flashed in her green eyes. Something that didn't belong in the eyes of a waitress making minimum wage. I said. James stepped closer, his voice dropping to a menacing growl. Get on your knees and clean my shoes. Maybe then I won't have you thrown out in the alley with the rest of the garbage. Isabella looked at the napkin in her hand. Then she looked at the arrogant tilt of his chin. She took a breath. The submissive posture vanished. Her shoulders squared, her chin lifted. She dropped the napkin. It floated to the floor, landing on his shoe. No, she said. The word hung in the air. Silvio's jaw dropped. James blinked, genuinely confused for a split second. Excuse me? James stepped into a personal space, radiating menace. Did you just say no to me? I said no, Isabella repeated. Her voice wasn't shaking. It was cold. Ice cold. I apologized. It was an accident caused by your associate's temper. I will not degrade myself for your ego, James. Using his first name was the final nail in the coffin. James grabbed a glass of water from the table and splashed it directly into her face. The shock made Isabella gasp, water dripping from her eyelashes, ruining her makeup. You're fired, James spat. Get out of my sight before I have you dragged out. He turned his back on her, dismissing her like she was nothing. Silvio, get me a new shirt, and get someone to sanitize this area. It smells like poverty. Ethan. Isabella stood there for a heartbeat, water dripping down her nose. The shame was there, yes, but it was being rapidly consumed by a blazing, white-hot fury. She wiped her face with her hand. Careful, Don Ricci, she said. James paused. He turned his head slightly, mocking her. Are you threatening me, waitress? Isabella stepped closer, invading his space now. She leaned in, her lips inches from his ear, so only he and Silvio could hear. When she spoke, the English was gone. She switched to a dialect of Sicilian so ancient, so specific to the mountain villages near Palermo, that only the old guard used it. Lo sangue non si sciacqua più l'acqua, she whispered. Blood cannot be rinsed away with water. James froze. His eyes widened, his pupils blowing wide. That wasn't just a proverb. It was the family motto of the Vitiello crime syndicate, the family his father had wiped out 20 years ago. The family that was supposed to be extinct. Isabella pulled back, a dark, satisfied smirk playing on her lips. She reached into her apron, pulled out her name tag, and tossed it onto the table next to the spilled wine. Keep the change, she said in English. She turned on her heel and walked out of the restaurant. Her stride wasn't that of a waitress anymore. It was the walk of a queen leaving a court of jesters. James stood paralyzed, his heart hammered against his ribs. He looked at Silvio. Silvio looked like he had seen a ghost. Dom, Silvio whispered. Did she just... James looked at the door where she had vanished. His hands, usually steady with a gun, were shaking. Find her, James ordered, his voice rough. Don't hurt her. Just find her. Now. James Ricci didn't sleep that night. He sat in his penthouse office overlooking Manhattan, a glass of bourbon untouched on his desk. The security footage from the restaurant was playing on a loop on the massive screen on the wall. He watched the spill. He watched the humiliation. But mostly, he watched the walk. The way she moved. It had been nagging him all night. It wasn't the shuffle of a servant. It was trained, precise, efficient. We have a problem, boss. Silvio walked in, looking pale. He threw a manila folder onto the desk. Tell me you found her, James said, not looking away from the screen. We found who she said she was, Silvio said, pouring himself a drink. Sarah Jenkins, born in Ohio. Social security number checks out. Address is a rundown apartment in Queens. Works double shifts. Pays taxes. And it's all fake, Silvio said. High quality fake, but fake. I ran her prints off the wine glass she touched. James finally turned his chair around. And? Nothing in the US database. But I have a contact in Interpol. I called in a favor. Silvio took a long swallow of his drink. Her name isn't Sarah. It's Isabella Vitiello. The air left the room. Impossible, James said flatly. My father burned the Vitiello estate to the ground in 04. Everyone died. The Don, his wife, the 2 sons and the daughter. The daughter's body was never found, Silvio corrected. They assumed she burned to ash. She was 12 years old, Dom. She would be 24 now. James looked back at the screen, at the woman with the black apron. Isabella Vitiello, the daughter of the man who had murdered James's uncle, the scion of the only family that had ever truly threatened the Ricci Empire. And he had just thrown water in her face and told her she smelled like poverty. If she's a Vitiello, James said, his mind racing, she's not here waiting tables for tips. She's here for a hit. That's what I thought, Silvio said. But look at this. He slid a photo across the desk. It was a grainy surveillance shot taken 3 weeks ago outside a warehouse in the meat-packing district. It showed Isabella, wearing a hoodie, standing over 3 unconscious men, Russian traffickers who had been encroaching on Ricci territory. She took them out? James asked. Cleanly. Broken bones, concussions, no kills. She left them tied up for the cops, Silvio said. Dom, she's not working against us. She's been cleaning up our mess on the fringes for months. She's acting like a vigilante. James stood up and walked to the window. The city lights blurred before him. He felt a strange sensation in his chest, a mix of fear and an intoxicating, dangerous curiosity. Why? James murmured. If she wants revenge, why help me? Maybe she wants to kill you herself, Silvio suggested. Maybe she's saving you for dessert. James grabbed his jacket. Get the car. Where are we going? Queens, James said, checking the magazine of his pistol. I need to apologize. And then I need to know why the last Vitiello hasn't put a bullet in my head yet. Underscore, 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 underscore. The apartment building in Queens was a crumbling brick block that smelled of boiled cabbage and stale cigarettes. It was a far cry from the palaces the Vitiello family used to own in Sicily. James went up alone. He told Silvio and the guards to wait in the street. This needed to be handled face to face. He reached apartment 4B. The door was peeling paint. He didn't knock. He picked the lock with a tension wrench he kept on his keychain, an old habit from his younger, wilder days. The door creaked open. The apartment was dark. It was sparsely furnished. A mattress on the floor, a table, a chair. But one wall was covered in maps. Maps of the city. Maps of his operations. You're loud for an assassin, a voice said from the shadows. James froze. He hadn't heard her. Isabella was sitting in the corner on the windowsill. She wasn't wearing the Waitress uniform anymore. She was wearing black tactical pants and a tight tank top. In her hand, resting casually on her knee, was a suppressed Glock 19. Isabella, James said, keeping his hands visible. You know my name, she said, her voice devoid of the fear she had feigned at the restaurant. Took you long enough. Your father was sharper. My father was a butcher, James said, stepping into the room. And what are you, James? She stood up. She was smaller than him, but in this room, she felt like the giant. Are you just the man who bullies waitresses to feel big? I didn't know, James said. It was the closest he had come to an apology in years. I came to talk. Talk fast, Isabella said, raising the gun slightly, because my shift starts in an hour, and unlike you, I work for a living. Why are you here? James asked. Why are you taking out the Russians in my territory? Why haven't you killed me? Isabella laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. You think I want your throne? You can keep it. It's made of bones. She walked closer to him, the gun never wavering. I'm not here for you, James. I'm here because the man who actually killed my family, the man who manipulated your father into starting that war, is back in New York. James frowned. My father started the war because your father stole the port shipments. My father never stole a thing, Isabella spat. It was a setup, by the Russians. Specifically, by a man named Volkov. The name hit James like a physical blow. Volkov was his new supplier, the man he was supposed to sign $1 billion deal with on Friday. "You're lying," James said, though doubt was already creeping in. "Am I?" Isabella reached into her pocket and tossed a flash drive at him. He caught it. "Listen to the audio files on that. Volkov is playing you. He's going to use your roots to move a dirty bomb into the city, then sell you out to the feds to clear his own slate. He destroys the Ritchie Empire and the city in one move." James gripped the flash drive. "Why tell me? Why not let me burn?" Isabella looked at him, and for a second the hard mask slipped. He saw the tired, lonely girl beneath the soldier. "Because this city is my home too," she said softly. "And because I saw you 3 years ago. At the park, you gave your coat to a homeless man. I realized then you weren't your father." She hardened her gaze again. "But today, at the restaurant? You proved me wrong. You're exactly like him." "Bella." James took a step forward. Click. The sound of a door being kicked in echoed from the hallway. Heavy boots thundered on the stairs. "Did you bring friends?" Isabella hissed, her eyes snapping to the door. "No," James said, drawing his own weapon. "My men are outside." Isabella checked the window. "Your men are dead, James. I can see the bodies from here." James's blood ran cold. "Volkov," Isabella realized. "He must have been tracking you. He knows you're here." Bullets shredded the wooden door of the apartment. Splinters flew like shrapnel. "Get down!" James roared, lunging for her. He tackled Isabella to the ground just as a hail of automatic gunfire tore through the room, destroying the maps, the lamp, and the window. They landed in a tangle of limbs behind the overturned mattress. For a moment, their faces were inches apart. He could smell her scent. Vanilla and gun oil. "Get off me!" Isabella growled, shoving him. "We have to move!" James yelled over the gunfire. "Fire escape?" "Blocked," she said, pulling a second magazine from her boot. "We have to fight our way down." She looked at him, her green eyes blazing. "Try not to ruin your suit, Don Ritchie," she smirked. And for the first time in his life, terrified and adrenaline-pumped, James Ritchie smiled. "After you, Waitress." The hallway outside apartment 4B was a kill box. The wood of the doorframe splintered as another volley of rounds chewed through the plaster. James Ritchie, a man used to commanding armies, found himself taking orders from the woman he had tried to humiliate an hour ago. "On 3!" Isabella yelled over the deafening roar of assault rifles. She pulled the pin on a flashbang grenade she had retrieved from a hidden compartment under the floorboards. "Cover your eyes! 1, 2, 3! She tossed the canister into the hallway. A second later, a blinding white light and a thunderous crack shook the building. Screams of confusion erupted from the Russian hitmen. "Move!" Isabella grabbed James's expensive suit jacket and hauled him up. They burst into the hallway. James raised his weapon, firing with practiced precision. Pop, pop, pop! 3 men went down, clutching their chests. But there were more coming up the stairs. "Roof!" Isabella shouted, kicking a jamming Russian in the knee and slamming the butt of her gun into his temple. She moved like water, fluid, deadly, and unstoppable. They sprinted up the stairwell, bullets nipping at their heels. They burst onto the tar paper roof, the cool night air of Queens filling their lungs. The Manhattan skyline glittered in the distance, mocking them. "We're trapped," James growled, scanning the perimeter. "It's a 4-story drop." "For you, maybe," Isabella panted. She ran to the edge of the roof where a heavy construction cable was rigged to a neighboring building, an old textile factory. She clipped a carabiner from her belt onto the line. "Hold on to me, tight." James looked at the thin cable, then at the woman. "You're insane." "I'm alive," she retorted. "Make a choice, boss. Die here in your Italian leather or jump." The heavy metal door behind them began to buckle as the Russians rammed it. James cursed, holstered his weapon, and wrapped his arms around Isabella's waist. Her body was tense, solid muscle beneath the tactical gear. He buried his face in the crook of her neck. "Jump!" They launched off the ledge. The wind roared in James's ears. For 3 seconds, they were weightless, sliding rapidly across the alleyway suspended by a single wire. Gunfire erupted from the roof they had just left, bullets whizzing past them like angry hornets. They hit the opposite roof hard. Isabella took the impact with a roll, dragging James with her. He groaned as his shoulder slammed into a ventilation unit. "Up!" she commanded, not giving him a second to breathe. "They'll have eyes on the street in 2 minutes." They scrambled down the fire escape of the factory, landing in a dark, garbage-strewn alley. Isabella didn't stop. She led him to a rusted, nondescript sedan covered in a tarp behind a dumpster. "This is your chariot?" James asked, wincing as he clutched his shoulder. He felt warmth spreading through his shirt. Blood. A graze, but deep. "It's a ghost car. No plates, untraceable engine," Isabella said, ripping the tarp off. "Get in." She hot-wired the car in under 10 seconds. As the engine roared to life, a black SUV screeched to a halt at the mouth of the alley. 2 men leaned out with submachine guns. "Get down!" James shouted, pushing Isabella's head toward the steering wheel as the back window shattered into 1,000 diamonds. Isabella didn't flinch. She slammed the car into reverse, tires smoking. She didn't back away. She backed into them. The rusted sedan slammed into the front of the expensive SUV with a bone-jarring crunch, smashing the SUV's radiator and sending the gunman tumbling. She shifted gears and gunned it, drifting out of the alley and merging onto the main road, disappearing into the traffic of Queens before the Russians could recover. James slumped in the passenger seat, adrenaline fading, replaced by searing pain. He looked at Isabella. Her face was set in a mask of concentration, illuminated by the passing streetlights. "You drive like a maniac," he muttered, his voice strained. "I drive like a survivor," she corrected. She glanced at his shoulder. "You're bleeding on my upholstery." "I'll buy you a new car," he grunted, clutching the wound. "You can't buy anything right now, James," she said, her voice dropping. "Check your phone." James pulled his smartphone out with his good hand. No signal. "They've jammed your SIM," Isabella said. "And look at the news." She turned on the car radio. "Breaking news tonight. A massive explosion at the Ricci shipping warehouses in the Bronx. Police are reporting multiple casualties. Unconfirmed reports state that James Ricci, the alleged head of the family, has been assassinated in a gangland shootout in Queens." James stared at the radio. "They think I'm dead." "Volkov moves fast," Isabella said, gripping the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white. "He wiped out your warehouse to cripple your income, and he put out the hit on you to cut off the head of the snake. By tomorrow morning, he'll claim your territory." James felt a cold rage settle in his gut. His empire was burning. His men were dead. And the only person keeping him alive was the woman he had treated like dirt. "Where are we going?" James asked. "My penthouse is a fortress. We go there." "Your penthouse is the first place they'll look," Isabella said, shaking her head. "And your security chief? Who do you think gave Volkov your location tonight?" James went silent. The betrayal stung worse than the bullet wound. "So where?" he asked. Isabella turned the car onto a dark, unlit road, heading out of the city. "Somewhere nobody looks for a billionaire," she said. "My childhood home." The childhood home wasn't a house. It was a derelict cabin in the woods of upstate New York, miles from the nearest paved road. It was freezing, dusty, and smelled of pine and old memories. Isabella kicked the door open and ushered James inside. She lit a kerosene lamp, casting long, dancing shadows against the log walls. "Sit," she ordered, pointing to a sturdy wooden table. James sank onto the bench. The adrenaline had completely worn off, leaving him exhausted and in pain. His shoulder was throbbing. Isabella disappeared into a back room and returned with a first aid kit that looked like it belonged to a combat medic, not a waitress. She set a bottle of cheap whiskey on the table. "Drink," she said. "I don't have anesthesia." James took a long pull of the whiskey. It burned going down, but it dulled the edge of the pain. He watched her as she cut away his ruined shirt, the $5,000 custom piece he had been so worried about earlier. Now it was just bloody rags. "You're good at this," James observed as she cleaned the wound with iodine. Her hands were steady, her touch surprisingly gentle despite her harsh words. "I had to learn," Isabella said, not meeting his eyes. "Or when you're on the run at 12 years old, you learn to stitch your own cuts." "Tell me," James said, wincing as the needle pierced his skin. "Tell me about that night." "The fire." Isabella paused. The needle hovered in the air. For a moment, the silence in the cabin was heavy. "I was hiding in the pantry," she whispered. "I heard your father shouting. He was demanding to know where the ledger was. My father didn't have it because Volkov had already stolen it." She resumed stitching, her jaw tight. "I heard the shots, 4 of them. Then the smell of gasoline. I crawled out through the cellar window. I ran into the woods and didn't stop running for 3 days. James watched her profile, the soft curve of her nose, the fierce set of her brow. He realized with a jolt that she was beautiful, not in the polished, plastic way of the women he usually dated, but in a raw, elemental way. "I grew up hating the name Ricci," she continued. "I trained for 12 years to kill you. I learned martial arts, marksmanship, espionage. I got a job at your favorite restaurant just to learn your schedule." "Why didn't you do it?" James asked softly. "You poured wine for me for 6 months. You could have poisoned me. You could have stabbed me with a steak knife." Isabella tied off the stitch and snipped the thread. She finally looked at him. Her green eyes were swimming with conflicting emotions. "Because I watched you," she said. "I saw you pay for the surgery of your driver's daughter. I saw you refuse to deal in human trafficking, even when the other families pressured you. I realized that while you are an arrogant, spoiled prick, you aren't evil. You aren't your father." James let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. He reached out, his hand covering hers on the table. She didn't pull away. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "For today. For the way I treated you. For everything my family took from yours." Isabella looked down at his hand. It was large, calloused, and currently covered in his own blood. "Sorry doesn't fix the past, James," she said quietly. "But fixing the future might." She pulled her hand away and stood up, pacing the small room. "Volkov isn't just taking your territory," she said, switching back to soldier mode. "The flash drive I gave you? It contains blueprints. He's bringing in a shipment of chemical weapons tomorrow night through the Jersey docks. He plans to detonate one in the financial district and blame it on the Ricci family war. He wants to wipe out the old guard and bring in the Russian chaos." James stood up, ignoring the protest of his muscles. The reality of the situation sobered him instantly. "If he does that, the feds will come down on us with the force of God," James said. "There won't be a Ricci family left, or a city." "Exactly," Isabella said. "We have to stop the shipment." "We?" James raised an eyebrow. "I have no men, no resources. I'm a dead man walking." "You have me," Isabella said simply. She walked over to a loose floorboard in the corner and pried it up. Beneath it lay a small arsenal, assault rifles, night vision goggles, and explosives. James stared at the stash. "You really were planning to kill me." "I like to be prepared," she shrugged, tossing him a heavy combat shotgun. "But now we're going to use this to take back your city." James caught the weapon. He looked at the waitress, the warrior, standing before him. The power dynamic had completely shifted. He wasn't the boss here. He was the partner, and for the first time in his life he trusted someone completely. "Okay, partner," James grinned, a dangerous, wolfish expression returning to his face. "What's the plan?" Isabella unrolled a map on the table. "Tomorrow night, the Volga Star docks at Pier 9. We don't just stop the shipment. We capture Volkov, and we make him confess everything on camera. Just the two of us against an army? James asked. Isabella pulled a knife from her boot and stabbed it into the map, right over Pier 9. Not just the two of us, she said, a mysterious glint in her eye. I made a few friends while I was living in the shadows. People the mob forgot. People you forgot. She pulled out a burner phone and dialed a number. It's the ghost, she said into the phone. Wake the boys up. We have a war to win. The headlights of 3 vehicles cut through the pitch-black darkness of the woods, illuminating the front of the derelict cabin. James instinctively reached for the shotgun, but Isabella placed a calming hand on his arm. Relax, she said. The cavalry is here. The doors of the vehicles opened. Out stepped a group of people that looked less like an elite strike force and more like the cast of a tragic play. There was an old man leaning heavily on a cane, a teenager in a wheelchair with a laptop strapped to his chest, and a massive, hulking man whose face was a roadmap of old scars. James squinted. He recognized them. The old man was Saul, a legendary cleaner for the mob who had been discarded by James's father 10 years ago when arthritis took his hands. The giant was Brick Bronson, a former enforcer who had been fired for refusing to hurt a woman. You collected them, James realized, stepping onto the porch. The people we threw away. One man's trash is another woman's army, Isabella said, walking down the steps to greet them. The tension was palpable as James followed her. Brick Bronson stiffened, his massive fists clenching as he saw the Don. Saul spat on the ground. You got a lot of nerve bringing him here, ghost, Saul rasped, eyeing James with contempt. His old man is the reason I eat cat food in a trailer park. He's not his father, Saul, Isabella said firmly, standing between them. And tonight, he's not the Don. He's just a man who wants to save his city. And he's willing to pay for the privilege. She looked back at James. James understood. He stepped forward, lowering his weapon. He looked at the ragtag group, men and women his family had chewed up and spit out. I can't change what my father did, James said, his voice projecting command despite his injuries, and I can't undo the neglect I showed you. But Volkov is going to burn this city down tonight. If you help us stop him, I won't just owe you a favor. I'll owe you a future. Double pensions for everyone, reinstatement, respect. He looked at Brick, and an apology. You were right to refuse that order, Bronson. You had more honor than the man giving it. Brick stared at him for a long moment, then slowly nodded. I'm in. We're all in, the kid in the wheelchair said, tapping his keyboard. Name's Jinx. I've already hacked the Port Authority cameras. The Volga Star is docked at Pier 9. But Dom, it's crawling with Russians. At least 50 heavily armed mercenaries. 50 against 6, James noted dryly. I like those odds. We don't need to fight all 50, Isabella said, leading them back inside to the map. We just need to cut the head off the snake. The planning session was intense. Isabella wasn't just a participant. She was the general. She commanded the room with a natural authority that made James's chest ache with a strange mix of pride and regret. She was born to lead, and he had made her scrub floors. As the team dispersed to prep the gear, James found Isabella in the back room, loading magazines for a customized MP5. You're amazing, he said quietly. Isabella didn't look up, but her hands paused for a fraction of a second. I'm surviving. There's a difference. No, James moved closer, trapping her gently against the workbench. The air between them crackled. I've been surrounded by captains and soldiers my whole life. None of them command loyalty like you do. You saved these people. They saved me, she whispered, finally looking up. Her green eyes searched his face. When I had nothing, they gave me a family. Something you wouldn't understand. I think I'm starting to, James said. He reached out, his thumb grazing her cheekbone, wiping away a smudge of gun oil. Isabella, if we survive tonight, don't, she stopped him, her breath hitching. Don't make promises in a war zone, James. It's bad luck. Not a promise, he murmured, leaning in until their foreheads touched. A fact. When this is over, you're not disappearing again. I won't let you. For a moment, the assassin melted. She leaned into his touch, closing her eyes. It was a brief, stolen moment of peace in the eye of the hurricane. "Load up, boss," she said softly, pulling away and shoving a tactical vest into his chest. "Try not to get shot this time. I'm out of stitches." James grinned, pulling the black Kevlar over his head. He felt different. He wasn't wearing a $5,000 suit. He was wearing second-hand tactical gear, surrounded by outcasts, about to walk into a death trap, and he had never felt more powerful. Pier 9 was a fortress of rusted steel and shadows. The massive cargo ship, Volga Star, loomed over the dock like a black leviathan. Rain had started to fall, slicking the concrete and turning the yellow sodium lights into hazy halos. "Jinx, kill the eyes!" Isabella's voice crackled over James's earpiece. "Lights out in 3, 2, 1!" A thrum echoed through the dock as the main power grid died. The pier plunged into darkness. "Move!" James whispered. He and Brick moved toward the main gate, using the shipping containers for cover. Up on a crane tower 300 yards away, Isabella lay prone with a thermal-scoped sniper rifle, covering their advance. 2 tangos at the checkpoint, Isabella reported, taking the shot. Pff, pff, pff. 2 suppressed rounds whizzed through the air. The guards at the gate dropped simultaneously, silenced before they hit the ground. "Clear," she said. "Go." James and Brick breached the perimeter. They moved efficiently, a deadly silent duo. They reached the secondary warehouse where the shipment was being offloaded. Inside, the scene was chaotic. Russian mercenaries were shouting in confusion over the power outage, turning on flashlights. "Now," James signaled. Saul, positioned at the rear of the warehouse, triggered the diversion. A massive explosion ripped through the fuel depot on the far side of the pier. The ground shook. "Ambush!" a Russian commander screamed. "Defensive positions!" As the mercenaries scrambled toward the fire, James and Brick opened fire from the flank. It was a massacre. Caught off guard and blinded by the darkness, the Russians fell back. James fought with a ferocity he hadn't tapped into since he was a street soldier in his 20s. He moved through the warehouse, his movements synchronized with Isabella's sniper fire from above. Every time an enemy popped up to flank him, they were dropped by a bullet from the sky. "I've got you," her voice whispered in his ear. "Keep moving." They reached the central office, a glass-walled room overlooking the warehouse floor. This was where Volkov would be. "Brick, hold the stairs," James ordered. "I'm going up." James kicked the door to the office open, his weapon raised. "Volkov!" he roared. The chair behind the desk rotated with deliberate slowness. It wasn't Volkov, it was Silvio. James stiffened, his breath catching. His consigliere, his oldest friend. The man who had stood beside him through blood and fire now lounged comfortably, rolling vodka in a crystal glass, smiling like this was a private joke. "Hello, Dom," Silvio said. "You look awful. That vest doesn't suit you." "Where's Volkov?" James demanded, lowering his rifle a fraction. "What is this?" "Already airborne," Silvio replied. "He hates bad weather. I stayed for the moment." Understanding hit like a blade. "You gave him the codes." "I did." Silvio rose, unbothered. "You were strangling the family with your conscience. No drugs, no trafficking. Volkov offered me the city. I opened the door. I trusted you," James said, fury cracking his voice. "And that," Silvio sneered, "was sentimental." With a snap of his fingers, 4 Russian commandos emerged, weapons trained. James didn't move. "Drop it," Silvio said lightly, "or my sniper kills your waitress." James's blood iced over. After a long second, he set the rifle down and kicked it away. Static exploded over the comms, Brick's shout, gunfire, then nothing. Silvio crossed the room and struck James hard, sending him to the floor. "Take him to the container," he ordered. "We'll end this neatly." Underscore, 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 underscore. James woke, tied to a steel pillar under red emergency light. Isabella was bound opposite him, bruised, bleeding, furious. They used stun grenades, she muttered. Between them sat a device with a ticking digital timer. 14 minutes. The dirty bomb, James whispered. Isabella nodded. One blast, 2 problems solved. I'm sorry, he said hoarsely. Don't, she snapped. We have time. She leaned forward. I lied about not threatening you. I carry a ceramic razor, small of my back. Reach it. Against panic and pain, James fumbled until his fingers closed around the blade. The zip ties snapped free just past 9 minutes. He cut her loose instantly. They stared at the bomb, then the sealed doors. There's one way out, Isabella said, calm settling over her features. James met her eyes. Tell me. You're not going to like it. Isabella reached into her boot and pulled out a small, antiquated flip phone. It wasn't the burner she used before. This one was gold-plated with a single emblem engraved on the back. A black hand. James's eyes widened. Is that? My father's emergency line, she said. The Vitiello dead man's switch. It connects directly to the Commission, the High Council of the 5 families. The Commission thinks we're both dead, James said. Exactly. Isabella opened the phone. But if I make this call, I'm alerting them that a Vitiello is alive, and that a Ricci is with her. It calls down a strike on this location. They will send the cleaners to wipe out everyone at this pier to protect the masquerade. Volkov, Silvio, and us. Mutually assured destruction, James breathed. It stops the bomb, Isabella said, her thumb hovering over the call button. The Commission has jammers that block all detonation signals in the area before they strike. But they will kill us, James. They won't let us leave. She looked at him, eyes shimmering with tears she refused to shed. It's the only way to save the city, to save the innocent people. James stepped closer. He took her hand, the one holding the phone. Do it, he said. Isabella searched his eyes. You're willing to die? For a city that fears you? I'm willing to die, James said, leaning in and kissing her forehead, because for the first time I'm standing next to someone worth dying for. Isabella let out a shaky breath. She pressed the button. Goodbye, James. Not yet, he whispered. As she put the phone to her ear, a loud clank sounded at the container door. The heavy lock bar was being lifted. Isabella froze. She didn't speak into the phone. The doors swung open. Silvio stood there, smug, flanked by 2 guards. Time's almost up. I just wanted to say goodbye, personally, before I... He stopped. He saw James and Isabella standing free, side by side. He saw the gold phone in Isabella's hand. Silvio's face went white. He recognized the phone. Every mobster knew the legend of the Black Hand phone. You, Silvio stammered. You didn't. I just dialed the Commission, Silvio, Isabella said, her voice like the Reaper himself. They're tracking the signal. They'll be here in 3 minutes, and you know what they do to traitors who sell out their own blood to Russians. Silvio panicked. Pure, unadulterated terror. If the Commission arrived, death would be a mercy compared to what they would do to him. Kill them, Silvio screamed to his guards, turning to run. But James was already moving. The moment Silvio turned his back to flee, the dynamic in the shipping container shifted from executed prisoners to apex predators. James didn't just run. He exploded into motion. He tackled the first guard, driving his shoulder into the man's solar plexus with the force of a freight train. The guard's rifle clattered to the floor. Before the second guard could raise his weapon, Isabella was there. She didn't use strength. She used leverage. She swept the guard's legs, grabbed his falling wrist, and twisted until the bone snapped, taking his sidearm in one fluid motion. Bang! Bang! 2 shots. Both guards were down, writhing in agony but alive. Isabella didn't kill unless necessary, a rule she had adopted to distinguish herself from the monsters she hunted. Go! Isabella shouted, tossing the stolen pistol to James. "I'll handle the bomb." "You said you couldn't disarm it," James yelled, checking the chamber. "I lied," she smirked, ripping the panel off the device. "I wanted to see if you were brave enough to die with me. Now go get the traitor." James stared at her for a split second, a mix of disbelief and adoration on his face. She had tested him, and he had passed. He turned and sprinted out of the container into the rain-slicked night. Silvio was running towards the end of the pier, where a sleek speedboat was waiting, its engine idling. He was screaming into his radio, demanding air support that wasn't coming. "Silvio!" James's voice boomed over the sound of the rain. Silvio froze. He turned around, pulling a snub-nosed revolver from his jacket. He fired wildly. A bullet sparked off a shipping container inches from James's head, but James didn't flinch. He kept walking, closing the distance like a Terminator. "Stay back!" Silvio shrieked. "I'll kill you!" "You had 20 years to kill me, Sil," James said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "You didn't have the guts then, and you don't have them now." Silvio's gun clicked empty. He threw it at James in desperation and turned to run for the boat. He made it 3 steps before James caught him. James grabbed Silvio by the back of his expensive cashmere coat and hurled him backward. Silvio skidded across the wet concrete, crashing into a stack of wooden pallets. James stood over him, the rain plastering his hair to his face, looking every inch the Don he was born to be. "Why?" James asked, the word heavy with betrayal. "We were brothers." Silvio wiped blood from his mouth, looking up with eyes full of spite. "Brothers? No, I was your shadow, Dom. I did the dirty work while you played the noble king. You wanted to legitimize the family? Go straight? That's bad for business. Volkov promised me the crown." "Volkov promised you a grave," James said. "He was never going to let you live, you idiot." "It doesn't matter." Silvio laughed, a manic, broken sound. "The bomb goes off in 4 minutes. We're all dead anyway. Don't bet on it," a voice called out. Silvio looked past James. Isabella was walking down the pier. She held the detonator core in her hand, a cylinder of glowing blue wires she had ripped straight out of the machine. "Jinx hacked the failsafe," Isabella said, tossing the core into the dark water of the Hudson River. "The bomb is a paperweight." Silvio's face crumbled. His leverage was gone. His army was defeated. He was alone with the 2 people he had wronged the most. "Dom, please!" Silvio scrambled backward, his voice trembling. "I can fix this. I have the accounts. I have the offshore numbers. I can give you everything back." James looked at the man on the ground. He remembered the childhood games, the shared drinks, the years of trust. It hurt more than the bullet wound in his shoulder. He raised the pistol. Silvio squeezed his eyes shut, whimpering. Click! James ejected the magazine and let it fall to the ground. He tossed the empty gun onto Silvio's chest. "I'm not going to kill you, Silvio," James said coldly. Silvio opened his eyes, hope flooding his face. "Thank you, Dom. I knew." "I'm not going to kill you," James interrupted, "because you're not worth the bullet, and because they want to say hello." James stepped aside. From the shadows of the warehouse, 3 figures emerged. Brick Bronson, clutching his bleeding side but looking furious. Saul, leaning on his cane with a grim expression. And Jinx, rolling his wheelchair forward with a cruel smile. They weren't dead. They were bruised, battered, and very, very angry. "You told the Russians to aim for the kid," Brick growled, cracking his knuckles. "Have fun, Silvio," James said, turning his back on his former friend. He walked toward Isabella as Silvio's screams began to echo into the night, quickly drowned out by the sound of approaching police sirens. "We need to go," Isabella said, grabbing James's hand. "The cops are here." "Let them come," James said, stopping her. "I'm done running." "James, you're a mob boss. They'll arrest you," she hissed. "No," James smiled, pulling her closer. "Tonight, I'm a victim of a Russian terrorist attack, who, with the help of a brave, anonymous citizen, saved the city. The narrative is already being spun. I own the newspapers, remember?" Isabella looked at him, stunned. Then slowly, a smile broke across her face. "You really are a manipulative jerk," she said affectionately. "I'm learning from the best," he replied. He cupped her face in his hands. The rain fell around them, washing away the blood and the grime, leaving only the truth. "You asked me earlier what I am," James whispered. "I'm not my father, but I'm not a saint either. I'm just a man who doesn't want to spend another day without you." "Is that a proposal, Don Ricci?" Isabella raised an eyebrow. "It's a negotiation," he grinned. "I'm offering you 50% of the empire, total control of security, and my heart. Non-negotiable." Isabella pretended to think about it. "Throw in that new car you owe me, and you have a deal." James didn't answer with words. He kissed her. It was a kiss that tasted of rain, danger, and a future that was finally, truly theirs. 3 months later. L'Obsidienne was reopened, but it was different. The atmosphere was lighter. The staff smiled more. James Ricci sat at table 4, the VIP section. But he wasn't surrounded by guards. He was sitting alone, reading a newspaper. A waitress approached the table. She was new, nervous, her hands shaking as she held a bottle of 1995 Chateau Margaux. "Mr. Ricci?" she stammered. "Your wine." As she poured, her hand slipped. A few drops splashed onto the tablecloth, dangerously close to James's sleeve. The waitress gasped, terrified. She froze, waiting for the explosion, waiting to be fired. James looked at the spill. Then he looked up at the girl. "It's okay," he said gently, flashing a warm smile. "Accidents happen." "What's your name?" "Sophie, sir." "Sophie," James said, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a $100 bill. "Keep the change, and tell the manager to give you the rest of the night off." "No." Sophie stared at him, wide-eyed, then scurried away as if she'd seen a miracle. "You've gone soft," a voice said from behind him. James turned. Isabella stood there. She wasn't wearing an apron. She was wearing a stunning emerald green evening gown that matched her eyes, with a diamond necklace that cost more than the entire restaurant. She slid into the seat across from him, radiating power and elegance. She was no longer the ghost. She was the Queen of New York. "I haven't gone soft," James said, taking her hand and kissing her knuckles. "I've just learned who the real boss is." Isabella smiled, picking up his wine glass. "To the future," she proposed. James clinked his glass against hers. "To the waitress who saved my life," he corrected, "and the wife who rules it." They drank, the king and queen of the underworld, watching the city they owned, knowing that the only thing stronger than fear was the woman sitting across the table. And that is the story of how one moment of arrogance almost cost a billionaire his life, and how the woman he humiliated became his salvation. It's a powerful reminder that you should never judge someone by their uniform or their job title. Beneath a humble exterior might lie the heart of a warrior, or the only person capable of saving you when the world falls apart. James Ricci learned that respect isn't demanded, it's earned. And sometimes, the person serving your food is the most powerful person in the room. If you enjoyed this twist-filled Mafia romance, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon, so you never miss a new story. What did you think of Isabella's revenge? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.